Welcome back to Sissy Maya. Make sure to subscribe to our channel to never miss an update. Additionally, consider subscribing to my Patreon to get access to these features, and much more. Claire packed her suitcase, making sure everything was in place. When she finished, she locked it up, carried it to the car, and placed it in the trunk, pushing it to the back. Though the case wasn't large, she knew Jay would notice it when he loaded the car. She'd already decided on her response: "It has some things I may need." She wasn't sure exactly what she was hoping for, but the time had come to face the problem. This vacation, a week away from work and routine, seemed like the perfect opportunity. As they headed south toward the coast, Claire thought back to how their relationship had started. This is Jay. This is Claire in Dr. Brian's office. My printer's jammed, and I need to get a report out this morning. Dr. Brian needs it for an afternoon meeting. Okay, check the back of the printer and tell me the company part number. There's a sticker with the logo and the number 1077. Is that it? Yep, that's it. I'll be down in about 5 minutes with a replacement. Jay checked his database and saw the number 1077 was for an HP 4 with 8 megabytes of memory. He grabbed the printer from the supply room, but a quick check showed it had only 4 megabytes. He added a memory card, loaded the printer on a cart, checked his reflection in the mirror, and headed to Dr. Brian's office. Claire was surprised. The IT guy didn't look like a stereotypical techie, no glasses, just a tie. As he swapped her printer, he asked about the issue. She explained how it had jammed repeatedly despite her efforts. Sounds like a dirty feed roller. Let me clean it, he said. Claire looked at his company ID. Jay, you're great. She placed a hand on his, smiled, and added, "Thanks for the help." The brief touch sent a spark through Jay. She was not just cute but kind, and he wished he could talk to her more. But Jay was shy and struggled with small talk, especially with women. 2 days later, Jay returned the cleaned printer to Claire's desk. When she smiled at him, he felt a wave of warmth. He swapped the printers silently and started to leave when Claire glanced at her watch. "Coffee break time. Do you drink?" she asked. Jay froze, thinking she meant alcohol, but then she grinned, and he realized she was asking to join her. "I need to return this printer first. I'll meet you in the break room in 10 minutes, okay?" "Okay, see you there." After returning the printer, Jay hurried down to the break room. He arrived just as Claire stepped off the elevator. He had never seen her standing before. Today, she wore a navy blue suit with a straight skirt that ended at her knees. The white blouse beneath had a tailored collar with a navy tie. Her navy hose and shoes completed the look, and with her heels, she was about the same height as Jay. He held the door for her, and she smiled, saying, "Thank you." He nodded, surprised at her politeness. Many women wouldn't have said anything, assuming it was their right. Claire filled a mug with coffee, added non-dairy creamer and sugar, while Jay grabbed a tea bag. They sat across from each other. Claire smiled, and Jay blushed. "Not much of a talker, huh?" she asked. "No, I guess not," he replied. "Well, where did you go to school to get into IT?" Claire gently steered the conversation, sharing bits about herself along the way. By the end of the break, she had learned enough about Jay to know she wanted to encourage their relationship. She'd have to take the initiative, at least for now. The next day, Jay decided to get his tea from the break room instead of the IT section. He was disappointed when he arrived and found the room empty. As he filled his cup, Claire entered with another woman, both looking smart, Claire in a black dress with white trim, and the other woman in a light grey suit. "Hello," Jay greeted them with a smile. Claire returned his smile and introduced the other woman as Sue from the office across the hall. The two women sat across from Jay, and Claire asked, "May we join you?" "Of course," he said. Sue gave Jay a once-over before saying, "Well, you definitely don't look like the IT type." Claire quickly nudged her and frowned. Jay blushed slightly and replied, "I make an effort not to look like a geek. It's better for the department's image." Claire shifted the topic,
and they continued chatting casually for about 15 minutes before returning to work. The next time Claire and Jay met in the break room, she was by herself. They talked about the current movie lineup in town. Claire was surprised that Jay wasn't interested in the big action films. He hadn't seen any of the Terminator or Men in Black movies. Instead, he seemed more drawn to what were often considered chick flicks, films typically favored by women. That was fine by Claire. She wasn't too fond of the violence in action movies either. When Friday came, Jay gathered his courage and asked if she wanted to go see a movie. Claire was pleased. He had picked up on her subtle hint without her needing to ask. After the movie, they stopped at the mall's food court for ice cream. Jay felt more comfortable with Claire than he could remember with anyone else. On Saturday morning, Jay followed his usual routine. He showered, dressed in his feminine clothes, and applied makeup, though he wasn't completely satisfied with his appearance. Makeup had always been tricky for him. After getting dressed, he went about his weekly chores: laundry, dishes, grocery shopping, and cleaning the apartment. He then relaxed with the latest issue of Vogue. After lunch, Jay removed his makeup and changed into his usual male clothes for a grocery run. Weeks passed, and Jay's relationship with Claire deepened. They had dinner together often, went out with friends, and enjoyed a picnic by the lake. Throughout it all, Jay was the perfect gentleman: gentle kisses and respectful gestures. Claire could sense that he loved her and respected her, but she also felt that he might be afraid to take the next step. She considered proposing to him, but feared pushing him away. She had tried to gently probe his past, but he gave no indication of any previous relationships that could explain his hesitation. Still, something held him back. Finally, one Friday evening, after dinner, Jay said, "Claire, I love you and want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" Claire, thrilled, immediately said yes. The next morning, they went ring shopping. Claire was aware of Jay's finances and knew they couldn't afford anything extravagant, but Jay found a beautiful set of rings that wasn't overpriced. That afternoon, Jay went home, packed up all his feminine clothes, makeup, shoes, wig, everything into a garbage bag. He drove to a distant office complex, disposed of the bag in a dumpster, and made a promise to himself. He was done with wearing women's clothes. Claire would be the only woman in his life. As relieved as he felt, a tinge of sadness lingered. The following weekend, Jay and Claire drove to a small town near the state line to meet Claire's family. Mr. and Mrs. Buckner welcomed him warmly. They seemed like his own parents, longtime residents of the town with many friends. Mr. Buckner was a mid-level manager at a local manufacturing plant and looked forward to retiring soon unless foreign competition shut the plant down. On Sunday, they attended church, and Jay was introduced to the whole town. He knew Claire's turn would come when he took her to meet his family. They returned to the city later that afternoon. 6 months later, they were married. The wedding was beautiful. The only thing that bothered Jay was a brief flash of jealousy as Claire looked radiant in her wedding dress. He had always wanted to wear one, too. He quickly pushed that thought aside. He was done with dressing up. Claire was the only woman in his life. Period. At work, both Jay and Claire received promotions. Jay became head of information technology, and Claire was promoted to administrative assistant. With the promotions came higher pay and more responsibility. They managed to align their vacation schedules. It was their first vacation since their honeymoon a year earlier. Their new positions granted them access to the company-owned condo on the Gulf Coast. Unfortunately, no one else with more seniority had booked it for that week. They crossed I-10 and continued south toward Panama City, then turned west along US 98. The beaches were stunning, and the surf was exhilarating as they headed toward Destin. The Florida coast in June was the perfect getaway. They spent their first day at the coast exploring the town, playing tennis, swimming in the Gulf, and lounging on the beach. Jay could sense that Claire was uneasy about something, but he assumed that, when the time was right, she would tell him what was bothering her. The balcony of the company-owned condo overlooked the Gulf of Mexico, offering the perfect spot for their first vacation together. The building was positioned so their balcony only received the morning sun. As they sat on the balcony in the late afternoon of their first day, Claire glanced over at Jay, who was sitting beside her in the deck chair. His slight frame didn't bother her. His gentle nature had captured her heart from the moment they met. He was reading a technical magazine but occasionally glanced at the people on the beach below. She loved him, and she knew that he loved her. The first year of their marriage had been wonderful. They had their share of adjustments, but everything was working out except for one thing. That one thing had almost sent Claire into a spiral. Initially, she was angry, then hurt, and then confused. She went back and forth between anger and confusion. Eventually, she sought counseling, and now, she was ready to act on the counselor's advice. She remembered his words, "Don't be afraid of silence. Be patient." Claire reached for Jay's hand, studying his long fingers, their nails well maintained. Though they weren't perfectly shaped, a coat of polish could easily make them look like a woman's nails. Her gaze shifted to his arm, where the fine, almost blonde hair was barely noticeable. His face was nearly beardless, shaving only once or twice a week. His light brown hair had natural blonde streaks. Jay turned his head and smiled at her. She forced a smile in return, her heart racing. She looked away and asked, "Jay, what do you know about transvestites?" She couldn't bring herself to look at him, afraid of what she might see. She felt his hand flinch slightly. He answered cautiously, "You mean men who wear women's clothes?" "That's right. Just that. They like to wear women's clothes." "Are they homos?" "I understand that some are. Some aren't." "What about you? Do you like to wear women's clothes?" She felt his hand tighten around hers. She still hadn't looked at him, but she knew he was studying her, trying to figure out where this conversation was going. "Why do you ask?" His voice had a slight edge, though he was trying to remain calm. He wasn't ready to admit anything yet. She turned to face him, their eyes meeting. She could see the fear in his eyes, even though he was trying to mask it. "Well, you've been wearing some of my clothes. I figured you must like it." He blushed deeply, panic rising within him. He faltered, unsure of how to respond. Claire placed her other hand gently on his and said, "Okay, Jay. Now that it's out in the open, we can talk about it." Jay studied Claire. She wasn't visibly angry, but he couldn't quite tell how she felt. He was afraid of what was coming next. After a long pause, Claire spoke again. "We've talked about everything important to us. I thought I knew you, but when I realized you were wearing my clothes, I didn't know what to do. I even had some of the security people at the office lend me a small camera and recorder. I caught you on tape. At first, I was terrified. Then I was angry. Then I was confused. I didn't know what to do. Finally, I talked to a counselor. He suggested we get it all out in the open and deal with it." Jay exhaled, relieved. He took a deep breath and said, "Yes, I've been wearing some of your clothes." "Why? What do you want? Do you want to be with another man? Do you want a gender change? What's going on? Why do you do that?" "Slow down, please. You're asking a lot of questions, and I can't answer them all at once. I'm not sure I can answer some of them at all." Jay was still scared. He didn't want to lose Claire. He didn't want to hurt her. He was afraid whatever he said would be misinterpreted and make the situation worse. "All right. One at a time, then. Are you homo? Do you want to dress to attract another man?" "Absolutely not. I love you, and I don't want anyone else, man or woman." "Then why?" There was a long silence before Jay spoke. "Let me start from the beginning, or as close as I can get to it." Claire nodded, still holding his hand in both of hers, her gaze fixed on his face. "I don't really remember when I first became fascinated with girls' clothes, but I can recall asking my mom when I was about 10 or 11 if I could go trick-or-treating dressed as a girl that Halloween. That's a funny thing for a boy to want to do," she said. "But she borrowed some of my sister's clothes and dressed me up from head to toe: panties, slip, a pretty long pink dress with a full skirt, socks, and shoes. Then she combed my hair into bangs and pinned on a fall to give me long hair. I think even she was surprised at how much I looked like a girl. I put on a Cinderella mask, went out, and had a great time except for the teasing from some older boys. I learned then that, no matter how much I liked wearing a dress, it wasn't acceptable to do it in public. But that didn't stop me from wanting to wear it again. Jay paused, reflecting for a moment, giving Claire time to absorb what he had said. After that, I started sneaking my sister's clothes when I could, or dressing from the dirty clothes hamper. I really wanted to have some clothes of my own, but I didn't have anywhere to hide them. And I was too embarrassed to go buy them myself. At home, I could use my sister's or mom's clothes, though. My sister sometimes made comments that hinted she knew I was wearing her things, but she never made a big deal of it. I imagine Mom knew too, but she never said anything. During college, the only time I could dress was when I could be home alone. A few times, I almost got caught. Living in an all-male dorm was tough. Some of the guys made comments about me being effeminate, but I dated girls and didn't do anything that would make anyone think I was gay. I wasn't interested in boys, and I definitely didn't want to be labeled. When I finished college, I got a job and my own apartment. Finally, I worked up the courage to buy a few things for myself, usually from thrift stores or the unclaimed baggage store. I even ordered some things from catalogs, but that got me on mailing lists, and soon I started getting catalogs and ads addressed to Miss Jane Brown. I realized that could cause problems, so I stopped buying anything like that as quickly as I could. Then I met you. When our relationship got serious and I started thinking about marriage, I threw everything out and swore, never again. Jay stopped, and Claire gently rubbed the back of his hand. There was no anger or hurt visible on her face. The promise was made with good intentions, but I just couldn't keep it. Every time you were gone from the apartment, I found myself sneaking into your things. I couldn't resist. I can't explain it. I don't want anyone but you, and I want you more than anything, but I just can't stop the urge to wear women's clothes. Claire felt his emotions deeply. She reached over and pulled him toward her. You poor thing. I don't fully understand, but I believe you. I love you, and I want you too. Both of their eyes were brimming with tears. Finally, Claire spoke. This all lines up with what the counselor told me and what I've read about transvestites. What do we do now? Jay asked, dreading her answer. I think we need to adapt to a new reality, Claire said. You've done everything I could want to make me happy. Now, let me try to make you happy. Please go get the suitcase we left in the car. I think I need it now. Jay went to the car and brought back the single suitcase left in the trunk. In the bedroom, Claire worked the combination and unlocked the bag. Before opening it, she turned to Jay. Why don't you use some of my bath oil and take a nice tub bath? Shave your legs, too. There's a razor in the medicine cabinet. And don't forget to shave under your arms. While Jay was bathing, Claire knocked lightly on the door before entering. She took the jockey shorts he had brought with him and left a pair of beige nylon panties in their place. She smiled at him as she did. When Jay came out of the bath, he saw that Claire had laid out a wardrobe for him. He looked over the clothes, none of which he recognized as belonging to her. Hesitantly, he picked up the bra. The cups were made of lace, and he fastened the hooks and slipped his arms through the straps. The cups were empty, but there on the bed lay a pair of falsies. When he picked them up, he realized they were not ordinary falsies. They were soft but heavy. He inserted them into the bra cups. As soon as he did, he felt the weight on his shoulders. Claire watched, smiling as he adjusted the chest forms, gently placing his hands underneath them to settle them into place, just like she did with her own chests. Jay was nervous. Though he had done all of this many times before, it was always in private. Now, Claire was watching. He sat on the dresser stool and began to put on the pantyhose, savoring the silky feel under his fingers while admiring his now hairless legs. He picked up the beige slip, running his fingers over the wide lace band on the bodice, pulled it over his head, and adjusted it over his chest. He looked at the dress, with its long zipper down the back, and said, "I think I'm going to need help with this." Claire giggled. "That's okay. You've zipped my dress enough times, now I can zip yours." Jay unzipped the dress, slipped his arms through the sleeves and into the skirt, and pulled it over his head. He smoothed the dress down over his body and reached back to zip it. Claire stepped over and zipped him up. He turned to kiss her on the lips, just as she had kissed him many times after he zipped her dress. Claire smiled. The dress, made of a satiny fabric, had a fitted bodice and a flared skirt. It was snug around his torso, accentuating his now distinctly feminine silhouette. Next, Claire set out a pair of medium-heeled sandals. Jay sat on the stool and put them on, surprised at how well they fit. He had always known that Claire's shoes were too small for him, and this dress that fit so perfectly would have been too large for her. He realized that she must have bought these clothes just for him. He stood up and gave his skirt a small tug. Very feminine, Claire thought. He looked at her and asked, "Now what?" She replied, "What do you usually do at this point? Do you put on makeup?" "Sometimes I try a little lipstick, but usually I don't do much because of time and fear of getting caught. I just walk around the house trying to look and act feminine." "Well, how about we take the next step?" Claire said, opening a small sack and laying out a variety of makeup products on the dresser. "Since you've never done this before, let me help you and show you how." She gestured for him to sit at the dresser again. As Claire applied foundation, powder, blush, eyeshadow, eyeliner, mascara, and finally lipstick, she explained each step. The smell of the makeup and the taste of the lipstick was exciting for Jay. Claire not only explained what she was doing, but also why she was doing it. When she finished, she went to the suitcase again and returned with a wig that resembled what Jay's hair might look like if it were shoulder-length and wavy. She placed the wig on his head, adjusting it, and then pinned it into place. Jay was turned sideways to the mirror but had been sneaking glances from time to time. He was amazed at the changes he was seeing. When the wig was in place, Claire nudged him, and he turned to face the mirror. He was startled. The woman in the mirror wasn't a beauty queen, but she was pretty and definitely feminine. He smiled at her, and she smiled back. Jay then turned to Claire, who was smiling as well. He stood up, hugged her, and kissed her on the mouth. Finally, he said, "Thank you. Thank you for this." Claire grinned and said, "Now check your lipstick to make sure you didn't smear it." Claire picked up a pair of dangling loop earrings and clipped them onto Jay's ears. She then put 2 bracelets on his arm. "One more thing. Give me your left hand." Jay extended his hand, and Claire removed his wedding ring. Reaching into her pocket, she produced a diamond engagement wedding ring set, similar to her own, and slipped them onto his finger. "They're zircon, but they look real, don't you think? You may be wearing a dress, but remember, you're married to me," she said, kissing him on the mouth. "What's your name? Did I hear you say Jane?" "Yes, that's right. Jane." "All right, Jane, we've spent the whole afternoon on this little project. Let's go fix something to eat." Claire turned toward the door but stopped to watch Jane, who wasn't quite steady on her high heels. "Are you all right? Can you handle those heels?" "Oh, I'll manage. It's just that I haven't worn heels since my feet got too big to fit my sister's," Jane grinned. Claire grabbed the apron she had worn earlier and put it back on. After rummaging through a drawer, she found a frilly cocktail apron for Jane. Jane started tying it but stopped, backing up to Claire and saying, "Can you tie it for me? I want the bow to be pretty, not crushed." The two worked together as a team, as they had done many times before. While Jane set the table, Claire prepared the salads. Once they sat down to eat, Jane noticed that her portion was smaller than what Jay would typically have, realizing that, as a woman, she was expected to eat less. The meal was quiet, and soon they cleaned up the dishes together, working seamlessly. By the time they finished, Claire noticed Jane was adjusting well to the heels. She was taking smaller steps and placing the ball of her foot down first. It was clear she had worn heels before. As they left the kitchen, Claire asked, "Now what?" I've never stayed dressed this long. I'm not sure what to do. Claire smiled. Then let's go to the living room and talk. Let's get acquainted. She led the way to a stuffed chair and sat down, with Jane following and sitting in another. Jane smoothed her skirt before sitting, placing her knees together in a ladylike manner. Claire thought, she's working hard at being a lady. Then, she realized what she was thinking. Yes, she does look and act feminine. There are rough edges, but the basics are there: posture, walk, and how she sits. Claire shifted in her chair, pulling her feet underneath her and partially beside her. Jane asked, "How do you do that?" Claire giggled and repeated the motion so Jane could see better. Jane tried the same, her movements not as natural but still managing to mimic the position, tugging at the hem of her skirt when she finished. They spent some time talking about Jay's experiences with dressing and his fears of getting caught. Eventually, Claire moved to the couch and patted the seat beside her, signaling Jane to join her. Jane sat down, and Claire took her hand. "Tell me, what do you really want from this?" Jane was silent for a long moment before replying, "I don't really know. I've always had to sneak around to wear these clothes, always afraid of getting caught. When I dressed, I fantasized about looking like a woman and doing things like shopping or dining out. I also fantasized about you making love to me when I'm dressed this way. But I never really had any clear goals." She paused before continuing, "Now, it's your turn. We've talked about me. How do you feel about all this? We're in this together. You've been kind and understanding, but it's not just about me. You have feelings, too. You didn't just go out and buy this dress without thinking. How have you been handling it?" Claire was taken aback by the question and sat quietly for a moment, thinking. Finally, she said, "Honestly, it was difficult at first. I was scared, hurt, angry, confused. I didn't know what to do, so I saw a counselor. He really helped me. Between some reading materials he gave me and my own research on the internet, I started understanding transvestites better. But each person is different, so it's hard to make generalizations. The counselor suggested that we lay everything out in the open, and that's when I decided to bring you those clothes." Jane wrapped her arms around Claire, holding her close. "Oh, darling, I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to lose you." She kissed Claire gently on the neck, then her cheek, and finally, tenderly on the lips. The kiss lingered, and slowly, Claire started to return it. She opened her lips, inviting Jane's tongue in. Her hands began to explore Jane's body, sliding across the smooth material of the dress and down to the skirt. Jane cupped one of Claire's chests, gently rolling the pointer between her fingers until it hardened. When the kiss broke, Claire stood up and extended her hand to help Jane rise. "Come on, let's go to bed. I have another surprise for you." In the bedroom, Claire unzipped Jane's dress and began to undress herself. Claire was casually dressed when she quickly changed into a sexy sheer white gown. Jane, on the other hand, undressed more slowly, almost hesitating. Once she had removed all her clothes except for her bra and panties, Claire said, "Look what I have for you." Jane turned to see Claire holding out a gown similar to the one she was wearing. Jane took the gown, held it up in front of herself, and swayed in front of the mirror. "Go ahead and put it on, silly," Claire said with a smile. Jane slipped the gown over her head, then turned and took Claire into her arms. Their bodies pressed together, chest to chest, as they shared a kiss. The feel of the soft gown between them was thrilling. Jane kissed Claire on the neck, then traced her tongue into her ear, causing a shiver to run through her. She kissed her again, this time passionately, as their tongues met. The kiss lingered, and Claire could feel Jane's excitement pressing against her. When the kiss finally broke, Claire pulled back the covers, and they climbed into bed, wrapping themselves in each other's arms. "Make love to me," Jane whispered. The next morning, when Jay awoke, he briefly wondered if the events of the previous day had been a dream. Then, feeling the soft gown against his body, he knew it had been real. He turned to look at his wife lying next to him on the pillow. "She's an amazing woman," he thought as he slipped out of bed, removed the gown, grabbed his jockey shorts, and went to the bathroom. It had been a day like no other. Claire had accepted his dressing up. Not only that, but she had helped him. He never imagined such a thing was possible. He certainly didn't want to push his luck, though. Today, he would wear his male clothes and wait to see what happened. If this was real, there would be more chances to explore, and he wouldn't have to force anything. As he showered, he didn't hear the bathroom door open and close, but when he finished drying off, he noticed the shorts had been replaced with white nylon panties. He slipped them on and shaved before stepping out of the bathroom. When he entered the bedroom, Claire greeted him with a hug, wrapping her arms around his neck and gazing into his eyes. Last night was fun. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Oh, I did, my love. I did, he replied, smiling as she kissed him. I've laid out some clothes for you. Hope you don't mind. Along with the bra and chest forms, Jay found pantyhose, a half-slip, a light blue sleeveless blouse, and a long denim skirt that buttoned down the front with the last few inches left open. The medium-heeled sandals were placed beside the bed. After Jay dressed, Claire looked him over and said, I think you're going to need some help with that skirt. Take off the skirt and pantyhose, and put on this padded panty girdle. It'll help flatten that bulge and give you some width around your hips. Jay followed her instructions, tucking himself away. When he was dressed again, he noticed that the front of the skirt was indeed flatter and fit more smoothly around his hips and bottom. He sat at the dresser while Claire applied his makeup and placed the wig on his head. He was still wearing the rings from the night before Jane had returned. She stood up and hugged Claire. After a quick shower, Claire dressed in a similar style to Jane, a beige sleeveless top and a mid-calf length denim skirt, paired with low-heeled shoes. Jane couldn't help but think unladylike thoughts as she watched Claire dress. As they moved toward the kitchen, Jane playfully placed her hand on Claire's butt and gave it a gentle rub. None of that now, or we'll never get anything done today, Claire laughed. After a light breakfast, Claire said, let's go shopping. Jane hesitated. You're teasing. Someone will realize I'm not a woman, and then we'll be in trouble. She could imagine the headlines, local man arrested for dressing as a woman. But Claire reassured her. No, I'm serious. You look good, and you handle yourself well enough that no one will notice. Just watch your voice, speak softly, and take off the hose. In a beach town like this, no one wears them just for shopping. Claire drove to the mall, and they spent the morning browsing and trying on clothes. Jane bought 2 bras, some panties, a slip, 2 half-slips, and several pairs of pantyhose. As they turned away from the cashier, Jane smiled and said, no more wearing your stuff. Claire smiled back. Then Jane spotted a chiffon dress in coral pink with a ruffled neckline. It was an A-line style with an empire waist, and to her, it just screamed feminine. I've got to try this on, she said. They headed to the dressing room, and Jane changed into the dress. You look fantastic in it, Claire said, and they decided to buy the dress. Throughout their shopping trip, no one gave any indication that they thought Jane wasn't a woman. At noon, they stopped for a salad at a restaurant and discussed the morning's finds. Before leaving, Jane said, my legs ache, my feet hurt, and my shoulders are tired. I think I've had enough for today. Claire just smiled, and they headed back to the car. As they drove back to the apartment, Claire teased, don't you want to be a woman full-time? That way, you could wear heels and have a bra pulling on your shoulders all day. Jane laughed, replying, well, I definitely have a new appreciation for what it means to be a woman. I enjoy dressing up, but I don't think I want to do it full-time. When they arrived at the condo, they carried their shopping bags inside. Jane removed her skirt and blouse and hung them up in the closet. She took off the wig and placed it on the stand, then removed the girdle and bra and changed into Jay's jockey shorts. She also swapped the rings on her left hand for Jay's plain gold band. Under Claire's guidance, Jay cleansed his face, then slipped into a t-shirt and shorts and put on sandals. Claire said, I think we need to talk. Again, they sat facing each other, and Jay wondered what was coming next. Surely, Claire wouldn't take away the acceptance she had given him. Claire asked, "So, what do we do now? How much do you want to continue dressing? Is this something you want to do every day?" Jay paused for a moment before answering. "No, it's never been an everyday thing. And as much as I enjoy it, I don't think it's something I want to do every day." "Well, would you be comfortable setting some boundaries? Something so I know what to expect." "Honey, I don't want to do anything that makes you unhappy." "What kind of boundaries are you thinking about? How about limiting it to weekends? You'll need to buy your own makeup in the right shades and do it yourself. I can't do that for you every time. Besides, you'll enjoy doing it. Now, what about going out? I was terrified this morning, but by lunchtime, I was getting used to it and even enjoying it. But I haven't really thought about making a habit of going out." Then Claire surprised him. "I know I said weekends only, but since we're here for the week and last night and this morning were so much fun, I think you could dress up all week if you want." "I'd like that, but I don't think I could handle those heels all day," Jay grinned. "Then tomorrow, we'll go shopping for some flats. Let's go swimming now and maybe play some tennis later. After dinner, you can dress up again and work on your makeup. How does that sound?" Later, while finishing the dinner dishes, Claire said, "You go ahead and start getting dressed. I need to run an errand." Jay didn't ask what she needed to do, as she hadn't offered an explanation. Jane was struggling with the zipper on the back of her dress when Claire returned. Claire giggled and finished zipping the dress for her. "Thanks, dear. Should I start my makeup now?" "No, actually, I need you to undress," Claire said. Jane turned around, puzzled but obedient, so Claire could unfasten the zipper. She slipped out of the dress, and Claire nodded for her to continue. Jane removed her slip, bra, and chest forms. Claire gestured for her to stop. "Lie down on the bed and close your eyes. I have a surprise for you." Jane obeyed, curious about what was coming. First, she felt something cool being rubbed on her chest and smelled alcohol. Then, something else with the scent of ether was applied. Finally, she felt something heavy placed on her chest. Chest forms, she thought. She started to open her eyes, but Claire said, "Not yet. I'm not ready." Jane felt Claire's fingers rubbing on her chest again. After a moment, Claire said, "Stand up." Jane stood, feeling a new weight pulling at her chest. When she opened her eyes, she saw that she had chests, real-looking ones. She could see no seam where the forms ended and her chest began. Her face lit up. "Wow. I've got chests that look real," she exclaimed. Claire helped her fasten a new bra, a demi-bra that showcased her new cleavage. Jane turned and hugged Claire tightly, feeling chest against chest, which was a thrilling sensation. Jane went to the dressing table to start her makeup, but Claire pulled up a chair and began working on her fingernails. After some preparation, she glued on long, shiny red nails. "Don't worry, we can take these off at the end of the week," Claire said. Then she painted Jane's toenails to match. Once the fingernails were dry, Claire showed Jane how to pick up small objects like coins using the pads of her fingers, rather than her fingernails as Jay would have done. Under Claire's careful guidance, Jane applied her makeup, smoothing it evenly with the tips of her fingers. She almost poked her eye a few times while applying the eyeshadow. Everything felt different due to the longer nails. Once the makeup was finished, she placed the wig on her head. Then Claire presented one last surprise, a new beige blouse. It had short sleeves and a deep scoop neckline. When Jane put it on, she realized it revealed the tops of her chests, even without bending over. Jane then put on a half-slip and one of the new skirts she had bought earlier that day. The rest of the evening was spent working on what Claire called some rough spots, things like what to do with her hands when they weren't in use, how to look at her nails, with fingers straight and palms down, rather than curled, how to walk, bend, stoop, and eat without smearing her lipstick. These were small details, but important ones, things that women did differently than men. The following morning, Jane and Claire went shopping again, starting with low-heeled shoes that wouldn't tire Jane out so quickly. Then Claire suggested they buy a bathing suit for Jane. You probably won't want to go in the water with your wig on, but you'll want to lie on the beach, she said. After some shopping, they found a beautiful blue one-piece suit that showed off Jane's cleavage and had a skirt that would hide any inappropriate bulges. Next, Claire took Jane into a store that specialized in expensive makeup and offered makeovers. She said to the saleslady, "My friend Jane here needs a makeover to help her choose the best colors for her." Jane started to protest but then decided against it and sat in the indicated seat in front of the mirrors and lights. The saleslady introduced herself as Evelyn, then adjusted the lights to simulate daylight and evening. She produced an array of makeup products and explained that she would apply evening makeup first, remove it, and then apply the daytime makeup so Jane could leave the store wearing it. As Evelyn began to cleanse Jane's face, she noticed the wig. "It would be easier to work without the wig on, so we don't risk getting makeup on it," Evelyn suggested, pulling a wig stand from under the counter. Jane paled, but Claire quickly spoke up, "We'd rather not do that. You see, Jane is a man, and if we take the wig off, everyone will see his haircut." Evelyn smiled knowingly. "Well, she sure had me fooled. Here's what we can do. We'll put the wig on the block, hide it under the counter, and cover Jane's head with a turban so her haircut won't show. Is that okay?" Claire and Jane agreed, and the makeover continued. Evelyn carefully explained each step as she worked. Being a good saleswoman, she always referred to Jane using she and her, never once using masculine pronouns. Once the evening makeup was complete, Evelyn pulled the wig from under the counter, removed the turban, and quickly placed the wig on Jane's head. After adjusting it, she turned Jane toward the mirror. Jane caught her breath. She couldn't believe how much the makeup transformed her appearance. Evelyn removed the wig, put the turban back on Jane's head, and began cleansing and moisturizing her face before applying the daytime makeup, explaining as she went. When she finished, she brought out the wig again, placed it on Jane's head, and pinned it in place. When Jane looked in the mirror, she was pleased with the look. It wasn't as surprising as the evening makeup, but she really liked it. As Claire and Jane left the store, bags of makeup in hand, Evelyn thought to herself, "Well, you see all kinds in this business." But that was a first. That evening, Jane tried out the new evening makeup. As they were waiting to be seated at a restaurant, Jane turned to Claire and whispered in horror, "Do you see the way that guy's looking at me? I think he knows I'm a man." Claire smiled and replied, "No, dear. He's just checking you out. He likes the way you look. If he hasn't noticed your wedding rings yet, he may try to hit on you." Jane remembered the rings and, as if casually brushing hair from her face, raised her left hand to make sure the rings were visible to the man. Later, as they were walking back to the car after dinner, Claire pointed out a glamour photo shop. "We should get some glamour photos of you," she said. The shop was still open, so she pulled Jane inside. They discussed the prices, and Claire asked if they provided costumes or wigs. "We're on vacation and didn't bring anything fancy for this sort of thing." The lady at the counter assured them that the studio provided both costumes and wigs if the customer wanted them. Claire was about to make an appointment for Jane when Jane spoke up, saying, "Make 2 appointments. You should have photos taken too." After discussing the cost and whether they could afford 2 sittings, Claire agreed, and they set the appointments for the following morning. The next morning, Claire and Jane dressed in clothes that would be easy to change out of for the costumes provided by the studio. Both carefully applied their makeup. "I bet they'll want to redo the makeup," Claire said. "You're probably right. And that means we'll go through the same routine of removing the wig like we did yesterday." "Yes, but this time we'll be inside the studio, away from public view." At the studio, they were greeted by Jenna, who led them to adjoining cubicles and said, "The makeup artist will be with you shortly." A few minutes later, a slender man appeared and introduced himself as Lucas. "So, you two are together. Who wants to go first?" Claire pointed to Jane. Lucas stepped into Jane's cubicle and studied her face for a moment. He adjusted the lighting, then nodded and said, "Your makeup is well done. We'll start with a couple of frames as it is, then we'll change it to something more dramatic. Martha left a note saying you'd like to use our costumes." Let's see. You must be about a size 10. Come over here and pick one to start with. Jane browsed through the dresses while Lucas went to work on Claire. After considering several options, Jane chose a sweater and scarf set that seemed suitable for daytime wear. When Lucas returned, he looked at her choice and commented, going for a more casual look for the first shot. Her? He pointed her to a dressing room, where Jane changed into the sweater. As she was tying the scarf, Lucas returned, glanced at her, and said, "The sweater is fine for streetwear, but we want something more fitted here. Let's see if we can find a smaller size." They returned to the racks, and Lucas found a sweater in the same color but much tighter. "This may be too tight, but for the photos, it'll be just right." Jane went back to the dressing room to change. Scarlett, the photographer, adjusted Jane's scarf and had her pose in several different positions that accentuated her chests. Then she said, "You'd make a great cheerleader. Go tell Lucas you need a cheerleader outfit and a ponytail." Jane went back to Lucas with the message and added, "But there's a problem. I'm wearing a wig, and I don't think I can make a ponytail with it. I noticed the wig when I checked your makeup. Take it off, and let's see what we're working with underneath." Jane sighed and removed the wig. "I'm a man." "Good for you, honey. Don't worry, I like dressing up sometimes too. I see you're wearing rings, and you came in with Claire. Are you two married?" "Yes, we are. And she's okay with you dressing like this?" "Yes, we've only been dealing with it this week, but she seems to really accept it. She's helped me a lot with clothes and makeup." "That's cool." Lucas looked at Jane's masculine haircut. "This will be easy," he said. "We won't have as much hair to deal with as we usually do with Gigi's." He then went to another room and returned with a wig that was unlike anything Jane had seen before. "This is a theatrical hairpiece. You probably couldn't wear it in public without being noticed, but it'll work for the pictures." The wig had about 1/4 of an inch of skin extending from the hairline. Lucas showed Jane several cheerleader outfits and let her choose one. After she dressed, he began preparing her for the ponytail wig. First, he placed a wig cap on her head, then put the wig on and glued the skin to her scalp. Finally, he used makeup to blend the seam where the wig ended. Jane looked in the mirror and was amazed. Her newly blonde hair was tightly pulled back into a high ponytail. Lucas added a matching scrunchie to the ponytail. "Now, go give us the old-school cheerleader yell," he said. Jane returned to Scarlett and posed several times like a cheerleader. When they were finished, Scarlett sent Jane back to select an evening dress. She chose a black dress with a plunging V neckline, made from material that crossed over her chest from the shoulders, revealing a generous amount of cleavage. After she was dressed, she returned to Lucas. He removed the ponytail wig, cleansed her face, and applied evening makeup. Then he brought out a wig that was closer to the color of her natural hair, styled in an upsweep from the sides and back with bangs in front. "This will only show a little of your hairline," he explained. He glued the skin tabs at the sides of her face, covering them with makeup. Jane looked in the mirror, knowing she was ready for a truly glamorous photo. The rest of the week was spent shopping, dining out, and relaxing on the beach, simply enjoying each other's company. The days passed peacefully and without incident. On Sunday morning, Jane and Claire attended the early service at a local church before returning to the condo. They spent the rest of the day cleaning the apartment and finishing up the laundry, including sheets and towels. Then, they packed their suitcases. Once all but one was packed and closed, Jane sat at the dressing table, removed her wig, and cleansed her face to remove any traces of makeup. Claire helped her remove her fingernails and clean her toenails. Then Jane undressed and placed her clothes in the suitcase. Jay took a bath and dressed in a t-shirt and Bermudas for the trip home. Claire gave him one last check to make sure there were no signs of his weekend fam. Once she was satisfied, they loaded the car, locked the apartment, and headed home. On the drive, Jay reached over, took Claire's hand, and said, "You're an amazing woman. I love you." Claire leaned across and kissed him on the cheek, smiling as she replied, "You're quite the lady yourself, and I love both of you."